the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I am your host, Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And I'm joined again today, co-hosting by Pete Brown in Maryland in the United States. How you going, Pete?
Good. How are you, Vin?
I'm good, man. I'm good, considering the hour. But, let's not talk about the time or the weather.
Right. I'm excited to be on again, so great to chat with you.
Awesome. And today we have a special guest, but I may as well call him a second co-host because this is round 2 of our TechBytes show with Chris Mann of Link Audio here in Melbourne, Australia. Good morning, Chris.
Morning, Vin. Thank you for having me back on.
My pleasure, man. We had some topics that we were covering and we were getting right in the middle of it. And after, 2+ hours, we thought that we should put a pin in it and reconvene 6 months later. And here we are. A lot of the topics that we're going to cover today are essentially just a revisit from the last one, which is kind of good because a lot has happened in the last 6 months. So look, I'll kick off first with just the DAWbench Suite 2021. After all of the testing and some things that I was navigating with the high core threading on Reaper, we finally managed to get it out. And when I say we, that's myself and Pete over at Scan, and he did a whole stack of testing on the latest CPUs, primarily the 12th gen Intel, which delivered some very interesting results, and which I'll get into a little bit later. But in regards to the benchmark suite, so it's all 24-bit now. I've got it in 3 different sample rates: 44, 48, and 96.
Nice.
Yes, I know, Pete, you enjoy the 96 because that's what you run your system at default. And the response has been, well, it's just a typical response to every time we release one of these things. We've got the people that appreciate the work, and then we have the detractors, and I mean some of the qualms. I do my best to listen to all of the feedback and give a balanced response to some of the problems that people have with the actual benchmark itself. And it's the usual type of thing of, well, it's not representative of real world DAW session. It doesn't really actually represent how these CPUs are going to interact in the real world, and then you're going to get this divided kind of opinion of, well, what are you expecting?
No good deed goes unpunished, right?
Well, yeah, and look, some of it's very frustrating, guys. I have to be honest. I mean, we put in all this work in, and I've always been very clear what the benchmark suite is designed to do, and then it's an incremental, empirical test for scaling CPU architectures. It just happens to use a DAW for the source, right? So it's the closest thing we've got. It actually measures the actual scaling of the CPU architectures over the years very, very well. How that actually translates to real world is going to be completely dependent on session logistics.
Right.
But so for those people that actually understand, okay, so we've got a multi-core CPU, we have a DAW environment that does multi-thread, but they need to understand how it actually multi-threads. So it is per track. And then, the thing that gets thrown in is, well, once you start introducing busing, then all of those tracks need to be processed. All the processing has to wait, all the processing has to be done on the tracks, and then the bus is an additional one. And then if you load that serially, it lands on one core. Now, that's fair enough.
Right.
That's fair enough. So the argument that came up was, and it's come up a bit, is, it comes down to the single core versus multi-core, or what I like to term vertical versus horizontal, because that way it's easy for people to visualize what I'm talking about. And so they're talking about the vertical processing. So, you call up a bus, you start serially loading plugins, it lands on one core, clips that core, and then it doesn't matter whether all the rest of the cores are sitting at that 50 or 60%. If you've got one core that peaks, that drops the session. And look, I understand that. And so I'm trying to navigate that. And so long story short is that I've developed a busing extension test to try and emulate at least that scenario in an empirical.
Oh, interesting.
In an empirical manner. Now, yeah, hasn't been that easy. I'll tell you why.
No.
Is that so? I was just working off an idea of one of the guys at on one of the forums, and I'm saying, well, how do you expect me to actually try and emulate this and present it in a manner so that everyone can use it in an empirical manner, and actually report a result and something that's actually going to be viable in the benchmarking results, and how we're going to measure it between CPU architecture, because we're only talking a single core, okay? And the idea was load the session at around moderate to semi-high level. So let's say 60%, because that's what I've decided to do. So we load the session at 60% across all of the available logical cores. So it's all nicely load balancing, and we do that with the RxC plugin. And then I've created, so it's an 80-track session. There's 10 buses. There's 8 tracks per bus, and on those buses, then I've got 1566 plugins, which are fairly higher CPU resource, and then they're loaded serially. Now, the problem being that in Reaper, when I did that test and I started loading the thing serially, it was parallel processing them. In other words, it wasn't loading the single core. So I've gone, well, that's not quite working. So I've sent it to Pete. He's run the test, but he hasn't run it quite correctly. So I need to wait to kind of see that end result. But on his, because he was running it on a higher core and faster processor, what I saw was when he started loading the buses up, interestingly, and this is on an AMD, his personal AMD Ryzen, is that one, all of the load and task manager really leveled out nicely, where before it was very choppy. And second, there was a rise in all of the logical cores, and there was about 6 that were a little bit higher. And I'm not saying peaked; it was a little bit higher, but he wasn't running across 6 buses. So I'm at a loss to try and emulate this whole single core. How to emulate this single core thing. Well, not at a loss. I'm just still working on it. And the conclusion that I've come up with is that it's DAW dependent. So the way that it actually handles the processing on those buses and groups is going to be different per DAW. And I dug a little bit deeper with one of the guys there on the forum in regards, well, what DAW are you talking about that you're seeing this really pronounced single core? And, he comes back with Ableton and Pro Tools. So I've gone, well, Ableton's a bit of a basket case from what I've seen recently with some of this load balancing. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but until I test it more, I'm not going to go deeper in it. But I've seen some really uneven load balancing on systems where it's completely ignoring a whole stack of cores, and then there's a couple that are really peaked, and then there's others with some moderate. And I'm looking at a session playing back, and I've gone, what? I have no idea what it's doing. And we could we could write a couple of chapters about Pro Tools and its and the way it actually load balances. But just to give you a perfect example, there was during that conversation, one guy had brought up an example where he's recently gone from Mac to Windows, so he's still navigating that whole transition. But he said he's got a session with it had multiple hundreds of tracks of audio, so it was obviously like a big post session or something. A couple of hundred tracks of audio, and he's got various groups and buses happening. It was like 600 tracks of audio, mind you guys, just to give you an idea.
Jeez.
So obviously they're not continuous, so there'd be foley and dialogue and little bits and pieces. But then he had them all bussed, and then he made a comment. Well, all of it's landing on 4 cores. So we got 600 tracks of audio. I don't know the exact number of buses, but he said the whole thing is landing on 4 cores. This is within Pro Tools. So he's got the majority of these logical cores just sitting there idle. I've gone, well, if the number of buses that you're doing all this serial processing on is more than the number of logical cores that have been activated and threaded to, I'd be talking to AAVIM. So I don't know. I wasn't in front of it, but these are the type of logistical things that makes it near impossible to come up with this busing test. So,
and Vin, it feels like musicians, for the most part, shouldn't have to worry about that stuff. That's why what you said about Reaper is actually encouraging. That if it's parallelizing stuff that folks aren't really having to think about, and honestly, in the end, you're having to chase a rabbit here, I think, because of some of the detractors of it. What you have already is about as close a relevant benchmark as you can get for this type of work. I think people forget that. It's if you do benchmarking in anything else, they're never spot on. It always depends on a bunch of other factors.
Yeah, and look, I've always been very, very clear what the suite does, and look, and coming from another angle, I've got I don't know where these guys come from, and it's like I've kicked their dog or abused a family member or something. And these guys are coming after me, saying, there's absolutely no practical value in any of this, and I've gone, wow, okay, and I try not to engage with some of these people because they're basically just trolls. They just want to try and get a reaction from me. But I'll read what they've said, and some have actually made some videos, not against what I do, but they always manage to mention DAWbench to give themselves a little bit of a lift, saying, well, this is in comparison to what DAWbench actually represents.
It's a baseline. You're making it so it's going to be the same across a wide suite of things. Yeah. And everybody's going to have their own little tweaks they can do to do better or honestly do worse. Yeah.
And look, the thing is that then just to go back real quickly on, we'll call it the second qualm. We won't call him a detractor. We'll call him a qualm. And one of the conclusions that this person had come up with was that in his personal working environment, he has seen no benefit, no practical benefit going from a 6-core to a 14-core. And I've gone, oh, what?
Wow.
And he comes up with all these examples and all the rest of it. And so I'm watching some of the stuff and I'm reading, and really early on in the video, I see there's this flag that gets thrown up, and that if you're using Cubase 10 on a high-core machine and you switch off ASIO Guard permanently, we don't have to go into the detail again.
We've been there.
Yeah. But due to the thread limiting that they've introduced due to that whole MMCSS thing, and I promise people we're not going to go navigate in MMCSS.
Thank you very much.
It's basically not, well, it's not basically, he's limited the number of total cores on his high core machine to half -1. But then we're running a VEP environment that actually masks the fact that it's actually skipping all of these logical cores. But then you're feeding VEP, slamming that into the Cubase engine, which can only thread to the limited cores, and then come up with a conclusion that he's not seeing any practical difference. And I've like, well, it's probably because the Cubase engine isn't able to actually arbitrate all of the threads that you're throwing into it, and there's thread collisions going all over the place. So in the end, I've gone, I'm not even going to entertain it. And then a couple of other people have entered the thread and gone, well, I've never fired up Vin's benchmarks whatsoever previously, but I've got this CPU, and here is my here's my old CPU, and I've got a real world session, and I know exactly where the bodies are buried, and I know how much processing it takes, and I've gone to a new system, and I've run exactly the same session, and the performance variable pretty much lines up with what Vin and Pete are reporting. So there is some practical value for me because it's pretty much worked out exactly as what the charts are representing. So again, it comes down to the session logistics. So we could do a whole show on this, but I'm not, because I'm not going to give any more airtime to the people that just tend to want to attack the work, but are not really presenting anything that would help us improve the suite, if you know what I mean. So
it's basically the whole internet. So yeah.
Yeah.
Anything you ever share on the internet, that's the response.
Yeah. And look, I've even had one comment in private messaging where a user says, look, I've actually come up with a benchmark idea, but I don't want to present it because I don't think I could deal with just the people attacking it and questioning it. And I've gone, well, mate, welcome to walk a mile in my shoes, mate. For the last 15 years,
Yeah, that's unfortunate, though.
Yeah, but it's like you said, that's the internet. There's just certain people that I don't know. That's their whole time and energy, not whole, but a lot of their time and energy revolves around confronting people and just trying to pick holes through things. And I've gone, well, instead of doing that, why don't you actually do something and present something to the community where there is some value, instead of just attacking people that are at least putting in some effort. But, that again, that's the internet.
Yep.
Moved on. DAWbench suite, it's out. It's there. We not resolved, but we managed to work around that problem with Reaper with the high core count, where it was reserving that whole stack of
nice
processor overhead. I know that you and Justin are communicating at the moment on that. We won't go into detail, but Justin did finally pinpointed exactly what it was doing. He did say reserving wasn't exactly the correct term, but I mean, from a layman's term, that's exactly what it was doing. It was actually just grabbing that CPU resource, it was reserving it, and then it was being used, but it was quite detrimental at the point. But it's good that he's narrowed down what it is, and I know that you guys are in communication. So let's leave that one there, and I'm fingers crossed that we can actually get that resolved, which will be very, very nice.
And props to them on a great product too. So
yeah. Look, it's Reaper's great. We can that's we can do a whole show on Reaper, and I'm hoping to get Justin back on at some point, which would be good.
That'd be good.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on. DAW and Tech releases. A bit of a roundup. Chris, you can kick in here as well. Studio One 5.5. You want to give us a little bit of a heads up on some of the cool stuff that happened with that's been released with Studio One 5.5 release?
Yeah, no problem at all. It's actually quite a big release for a free version. So if anyone on version 5 automatically gets 5.5.
Yep.
And a lot of work done on the project page. So in Studio One, we have the song page, which is our typical DAW environment.
Yep.
And then we have in the professional version, the project page, which is
the master. That's the stereo mastering.
correct. That's where all the mastering happens and
Beautiful.
integration between the both pages. So there's been a lot of work done there.
Mm-hmm.
We have track automation going on there, which has been called for a long time. Clip gain envelopes been added as well, which are great. And my favorite feature, the listen bus. So there's now a dedicated listen bus in the project page for you to be able to run some diagnostic listening plugins across there, different to the main bus, which I is a good feature
nice.
that I like in Studio One in the song page. I think we've got some track transformation stuff going on as well. And then the other thing as well is multiple format exports in the song page. So now when you run an export of your mix down, you could do multiple variations of it in the one hit, which is awesome. You don't have to sit there and go, here's my waves, here's my MP3s. You can actually list a whole lot of stuff to do together, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Fair bit of work on the loudness digital release stuff. There's now quite a lot of different options there as well. And they've also added a new dithering algorithm, which is always an interesting one to try and test and play around with, because you don't quite know really what the dithering algorithm is doing in the background. But there's some new work being done there. So Ampire, the guitar plugin, now works on the show page. So the show page is also another version of variation of Studio One that you can run for live work. So you can load up your instruments, backing tracks. So now you can switch the guitar Ampire instrument, which is awesome. And at least another sort of 10, 15 other additional small features. So quite a big update. But for anyone mastering, they've been loving this update.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's awesome. And again, it's a freebie. So, but there's no hints of how far away 6 is. I haven't been following the actual cadence of the releases that closely. Is it once every 2 years?
12 to sort of 15 months. I don't think 6 is too far away.
So it's about 12. Is about 18 months, do you think, for the major releases or for the 0.5 releases? Because the
point releases often are 3 or 4 or 5, over an 18-month period. So there's lots of little stuff going on. And now, obviously, with the Sphere subscription model where you get everything, a lot of these releases are really good, because if you're on that membership now and you've always only had the artist version, well, you're automatically being thrown into the project page because you have Pro now.
Yeah. Okay.
So those updates are pretty significant.
Yep.
I don't have a lot of info on what's going on 6 yet. I think this DAW develops in very small increments and tries to put emphasis on not bogging it down.
Yep. Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah. I was meaning more the 5.5 to 6. I wasn't talking the smaller incremental stuff. I think I'm in Cubase land. They go 10.
Oh,
10
sorry.
They go 10, 10.5, 11. Sorry.
I thought you were talking like 6.0, which would obviously be a paid upgrade. But
but that's what I am talking about. So I'm talking about between 5 and 5.5. What was the time? What was the time gap between that, and then between 5.5 and 6?
5 months, 4 to 5 months.
Oh, okay. So it's 5 to 6 is usually what, 12 to.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. All right. That's good. Well, that's awesome. And so the next one that I want to talk about is that usually around November, December, like Steinberg always release a 0.5 update, and they didn't do it last year. So Cubase 11.5 is a non-starter, and it's not that it's a non-starter. Well, it is, because it's never going to eventuate. They're going to go directly from 11 to 12, which then is going to bring us into the next point of conversation, which is an interesting one, is that, and they announced it kind of earlier, because VSL have been trying to move their products across, but they're Steinberg are ending the e-licenser, the hardware e-licenser, which I have some reservations about. And I'm going to get you guys to chime in on your opinions on hardware copy protection. But for me, eLicenser is what saved that company back in 2000 and, well, I'm trying to remember, Chris, I think it was 2007, 2008. They bought the company. That hardware dongle has not been bypassed since. That pretty much saved them, because prior to that, the level of piracy that they were experiencing was just so detrimental. And so for me, that hardware dongle saved them. They hasn't been bypassed in all of those years. I have never had a problem with hardware license keys in regards to the physical thing. I can understand the qualms of some people saying, hey, well, I've got a desktop, I've got a laptop. I don't particularly want the laptop to have this physical key hanging off it. And other DAWs have multiple licenses, i.e., Studio One with their electronic licensing or their system ID locked licensing has multiple licenses, and others have as well. So I think Steinberg have made the decision to dip their toe into that pool. The initial announcement was quite messy. I don't know how closely you guys followed it, but
yeah, they weren't super clear on what they meant by that. I know people were reading it the wrong way, and it was a bit of a mess.
Yeah, but were they? All right. So the initial
maybe
the initial announcement was, okay, we've been listening to the customer feedback. The hardware dongle is going, the license is going. We're going to move to a software, web-based web-based copy protection. And they said, well, if you've got a legitimate license and it's perpetual, you're going to have to log in every 30 days and ping the server to prove that you've still got a legitimate license.
Right.
And I'm going, why? What could possibly happen in those 30 days? You're a legitimate user. The software's ID'd, hardware ID to your system, and whatever that hardware ID algorithm is, people use various different things, but it's usually the NIC. The NIC is a major component of the machine. What's going to happen in that 30 days? Why would you need to be pinging it every 30 days? So. And then they said, okay, well, we're weighing up the idea of you only have to log in once a year. And I'm still going,
yeah.
Why?
That's still annoying. I know that a lot of your customers and stuff stay off the internet, like with their PCs.
Well, no, they stay off the internet in regards to it being like a catch-all browser, doing all of their catch-all stuff. But it's near impossible to have a machine off the internet now, because you need the activations. A lot of the authorizations are now needing an internet connection.
I guess it depends on how Steinberg handles it, because if it's one of those ones where you're making some music or something at the coffee shop. I don't do that, but I know a lot of people like to do that. And it expires in the middle of that. You don't have an internet connection or something, then that's a problem if they don't give you a grace period or something like that. Yeah.
So cut a long story short, I usually stay away from any thread with anything to do with Steinberg, just simply because of the dynamic of some of what we'll call the entities that frequent these these threads. Yeah, there seems to be a Steinberg fan club that if they construe anything that is even vaguely negative, they're jumping on your head. And the question I asked was, well, is this a subscription model? Because I can't understand why, if it's a perpetual license, you'd be needing to log in to prove that your system ID hasn't changed. Because if your system ID changes, it breaks that copy protection anyway. And they just, mate, I was getting slammed. They're going, oh, what, you're scared to be on the internet? I've gone, hang on, whoa, I'm not even going there. Don't try the Jedi mind trick. I'm not saying anything about being on the internet or not on the internet, because some guys are going, oh, I don't like having the machine online, so that's not going to work for me. I went, that's not my argument. right? Let's keep the eye on the
Yep.
ball. My argument is if you have a perpetual license that is locked to a system, hardware ID, like fill in blank here. There's a whole stack of companies that do this and they do it quite successfully. Then I don't understand the reasoning for logging in. That's my qualm. Because then if you're going to be requiring a regular login, then we'll just call it what it is, and that's a subscription.
Well, so a subscription, though, the implication is that you're going to have to pay to renew that every so often.
Yeah, but also
it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it is. But if you didn't have an internet connection and it pinged, or if you decided I'm not going to log in and bang and the thing stops, I don't understand what the reasoning was. So, look, you're right. It is a little bit different to a subscription, but I still didn't understand the reasoning of why you needed to log in to prove that you are who you are.
I just think they needed to cut it, stop it, and not talk about it. I mean, they're the only door that actually still requires a physical hardware key to work. Back in the day when we were doing lots of Steinberg 20 years ago, I understood why it was there. It was there because the software was $1,500.
Yep.
And, you know, when someone was downloading a cracked version and then wanting support or whatever on it, that was quite frustrating. But it's not that anymore. And there's plenty of doors that have been down here. I mean, I remember Studio One was the same thing. It was pinging every 30 days up until really probably about 12, 15 months ago.
Oh, so I had no idea it did that.
Yeah. And then enough users went, this is ridiculous. My session is stopped. And guess what? It went away. I think the same thing's going to happen. You know, if they decide that they still want to hold on to that little bit of the jail thing that they have with their hardware, all that's going to happen is 200 users in the first time it pings are going to complain and the thing's going to go away anyway.
Oh no, it's already gone away. So
there you go. So
look, it's actually
you know.
it's actually good you brought that up. I had no idea Studio One. When did they sneak that one in?
It was pinging and Notion was doing the same thing. It was doing that for quite some time. Way before the Sphere subscription option was always there, and it got turned off basically because enough users went, this is crazy. I wasn't online and everything stopped, and it was gone literally within about 4 days of people going, not really liking this.
Well, you just exactly proved my point. It doesn't make any sense. And so
doesn't.
And it was, why would they even attempt to sneak that in? Okay, that's not you don't have to answer that question. So when you said it should go away, it did go away, right?
Yep.
So,
so now they're just like everyone else.
Yeah. So
I mean, you know,
probably about a month after me being pillared from the fan base, Steinberg announced that they had listened to the customer feedback and said they will no longer be pinging the server every 30 or 12 months, 30 days or 12 months. Perpetual license is a perpetual license. You activate it on a system, hardware ID, and it remains perpetual. And they've given you 3 licenses. And I've gone, but isn't that exactly what I just, fuck it,
yeah.
Isn't that exactly what I just said and got pillared to post? But some of the arguments they were coming up with, what do you expect them to do? Do you just want them to open up? And
Jesus, crazy though, because I mean, remember Pro Tools was the same. It took Pro Tools a long time to come off the hardware key before you could do it electronically.
But you know what? Pro Tools logs in all the time.
Yes,
and the soft iLock does it as well. So that's another. But so with one of the arguments with the Steinberg thing, it was getting ridiculous. One was you're scared to be on the internet, and it's scared to be on the internet. No,
I've been on the internet for 50 years, mate.
Yeah, mate. I'm not scared to be on the internet. Let me tell you. And the second one was, and it didn't make any sense, was that wait for this one. Once the hardware ID for the specific system, right? So however it was activated, the argument was once that gets in the wild, it's just going to be rampant. They're going to be shared. And I've gone, shared? How the fuck do you share them? I have no idea. So it was kind of this strange type of, you weren't having a conversation. People were just talking at each other, and I've just gone, I'm out. This is just ridiculous. And it's good that Steinberg did listen to that feedback and go, hey, this doesn't make any sense. But now you're telling me there's others that are sneaking it in as well. And I'll give you one more that I discovered that has got this ridiculous activation type of thing, that if you don't, so you do this online activation thing, and it gives you a code, and if you don't type, but it doesn't activate it automatically online. It gives you a code, all right? And if you don't type your code in within, I think it's 3 minutes or 5 minutes, it disables it. And you have to ask for another one. And I've gone, what?
Sounds like two-factor auth.
It was insane. And I think that one's dialing in every time you fire it up as well. And I'll just give you.
Is that a DAW doing that?
Yeah.
Or
it's kind of it's kind of a DAW. I'll give you a hint, right? It's got the name of it previously used to be the same as a breakfast cereal.
Yeah, that narrows it down.
You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
them.
really weird because they're following the two-factor authentication model, which you use for verifying that when you log into something, that it's actually you, which is a really good practice for logging into stuff.
Yeah.
But for authorization like that, that's weird.
It was bizarre. I think what it was is that in the past, one of the authorization modes was a little auth file that probably got spread, once you had one. And I think maybe that's what that other guy was referring to. He hasn't had any experience with Native Instruments, Studio One, Waves, TuneTrack. I could go on. All of these guys that have got successful hardware ID software authorizations,
it's good that you mentioned that, though. No, it's good that you mentioned that because my son actually asked for that for his birthday coming up here in a week.
For the breakfast cereal,
And so, the breakfast cereal one. And it's actually the first DAW I used on a PC as well. And so now I'll be prepared for when it starts asking weird things like that.
Oh, no, just do it real quickly and you'll be fine.
I don't need that kind of stress in my life, Ben.
Just don't get sidetracked for 3 or 5 minutes, or else you have to go ask for a second one. That's a beauty. Look, again, and Chris brought it up as well, that there's not many doors, or is Cubase the last bastion that was physically locked to a hardware? Now,
pretty sure it's the last one.
Yeah. But you know
Plenty of other stuff using iLock, though.
Yeah. But you know what? The whole software iLock, I am very suspicious with that one. I think that is pinging home all the bloody time, because I've heard of people saying, we're out somewhere, I don't have an internet connection and I can't access my program, my plugin. So I think it's doing that as well. I think it's doing it all the time, the software.
Well, it kind of has to, though, doesn't it? Because if you go and buy a plugin and assign it to your iLock account and then load up your iLock app, literally those authorizations are there within 15 seconds.
Can't they do a hardware ID? Can't they just do a hardware?
They do some weird hardware ID stuff, because like every time you upgrade Windows, you end up having to reinstall the iLock app. So there's some weird things that they're doing that are, well, they're weird. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And again, the whole copy protection thing, I understand why it's there. I fully support it.
I hate it.
We did go through that phase of where you had to have like 8 USB keys hanging off your machine at one point.
But did you?
Right.
Yeah, no, it did. A lot of the plugins were like that, going back 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I mean, I'm super happy that I don't have anything like that hanging off the back of my machine now.
Well, I would have just thought, I've got an e-licenser and an iLock. I've got a couple of iLocks. I've got an old one and a new one, and I've got various things on each one. But I could easily just shove everything on the one key.
Well, so Vin, I had both of those, and then I had a couple of compilers, software compilers that all had their own special dongle that was not that company. It was just like a massive chain of things.
Yeah. I mean, the only other ones that I remember from the audio world was Code Meter. Remember that one, guys? Code Meter, and people like Samplitude used to run on Code Meter, and it's Reason at some point had that Code Meter. It was just another USB kind of dongle protocol thing. I don't know. I'm not feeling good about the Steinberg move, because if their recent program manager is anything to go by, guys, I'm hearing the Benny Hill theme. Seriously, it's almost been comedic how many problems there's been with that, and I've gone, oh, okay. So I'm trying to prepare myself. But look, I'll be honest, and I'm going to be right up front here. I am not going to Cubase 12, and the reason, personally, I'm not dipping my hand in my pocket, and the reason being is that I'm not giving up my hardware Cubase license. I'm not doing it, because that hardware Cubase license that I've got runs any previous version of Cubase. So from Cubase 11 all the way back to all the SX version are working off that license. And I run various versions of Cubase for testing and like my audio interface, low latency performance stuff. That's based on Cubase 6. And the reason it's based on Cubase 6 is because I have to maintain 100% the testing environment for those interfaces. And so it's going back 10 years. If I update to Cubase 12 and then my Cubase 11 license gets pinged, which I would have to, I lose all of those previous licenses. That's just not going to happen. So Cubase, they haven't connected all the dots. So I've got we'll call it, I'm time stamping that e-licenser with my Cubase 11 license.
It's probably worth to wait and see what Steinberg actually does here,
Well, they've already reported that Cubase 12 will not run any previous versions.
Well, I have a prediction. I think Cubase 12 will come out and there will be a subscription model available for it, which will be minus the hardware key. Because that's what every other DAW is doing. That's my prediction. I think they're just going to go either buy a full version or you could buy monthly just to get into the market share.
Yeah, but the full version is not going to be on e-licenser. They're shutting down the e-licenser server, they said, at the end of this year. And so that's why people like VSL, they're shutting down the server. So VSL, for example, they got some forewarning about this. So they were kind of like the hairbinger, they were the canary in the coal mine, because they were reporting that they were coming off e-licenser. And everyone's going, why are you doing that? And they're going, well, Steinberg are actually going to be dropping the e-licenser. What do you mean they're dropping the e-licenser? So they were the hairbinger, right? So they were given the pre-warning that this was going to be happening. But they've known since about April, May last year. Now, get this, they still haven't managed to transfer their licensing from VSL. They were going to iLok, and they still haven't managed to do it. So I don't think it's going to be. I don't know why the difficulty. I'm not a code guy at that level, but VSL are having significant problems moving their licensing from the e-licenser key to iLok. And I think they're going to be going software iLok, which then, you've got composers with slave remote machines that never, ever see an internet connection, and they don't need to. They're basically just a big virtual instrument, I think there's going to be some pain ahead with that one. But I think everyone else that was on e-licenser have already moved off it.
So if they get rid of the licenser server, does that impact the previous versions? I would think it would, wouldn't it? If they're going to shut that down?
It's locked on the key, all right? But what it means is that if you break the key and you want to move it, you're fucked. Seriously. You know what I mean? Because it has to ping the server.
Right.
So if you break that e-licenser key and you want to move it to a fresh one, let's say you bent it. I've seen plenty of people who've accidentally bent it, right? So you've bent it, still working. You go, man, I'm going to move it to a new one. You won't be able to, all right? And if you haven't updated to Cubase 12 and they shut that server off, you've got no way of proving you got 11.
And those don't get pinged on a server like the iLok stuff does. It's hardware and it just sticks there and you're good.
That's it.
You move the license then it just stays there until you move it off.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So you can move between keys. So, for example, when you guys were saying I've got 8 keys hanging off the back, I'm going, why do you got 8 keys hanging off the back? Look, I've got clients that have got, for example, they've got their Cubase and they've got their Wavelab, and they had 2 separate keys for them, or they had multiple versions of Cubase. And they had them on separate keys. I've gone, why have you got, 3 e-licenses there? Oh, I've got, Cubase 10 on that one, and that's the old Cubase SX, and I've got, Wavelab on this one. I've gone, why don't you just move it all to one key? And they're looking at me going, what? Oh, man, fire up the e-license app. And then I just drag everything up, and I drag 2 keys out, and I'm going, put that in your drawer of spares.
To be fair, though, Vin, like those apps make it seem scary to mess with anything. And there's always the feeling like if I screw this up, there goes all my licenses.
Oh, yeah.
So I get it.
Yeah. If something goes screwy with the server while you're transferring your license, bye-bye. Then you got some explaining to do. Look, that hasn't happened that often. I mean, the only real licensing weirdness that I've seen is when of late with the Steinberg stuff or the e-licenses stuff was when Steinberg introduced that product manager thing. That was my first experience with it was that bad. I've refused to use it since. It's just.
I'm still sticking with my prediction. I think no update for a while. 12 will come out. It'll be awesome. 80% of people are going to go, yep, I'm on the subscription, and then they're going to have to deal with the 20% of people who are running old stuff, which they probably will.
Okay.
That's what will happen. And the other people will have to they'll deal with the other 20% of people with some of the older software, hardware licensing stuff. That's what I think will happen anyway. That's my personal opinion.
Oh boy. Well, that's going to be quite entertaining. I'm going to grab some popcorn when they actually
Well, they have to, right? Because everyone else is doing it and everyone else is offering everything for a monthly fee, and people the uptake on that is pretty high. I just think they're just going to join that game.
Yeah.
They've just done it a bit messily.
But personas still have their perpetual licenses, though. If you don't want to, if you don't want to join the Sphere, right? Yep. So, but the thing is, with the Sphere, does that mean that your licensing is actually subscription? You don't have a perpetual license with the Sphere?
No, your perpetual license stays in your account.
Okay.
But you can bounce in and out of the Sphere monthly or yearly.
Okay, so that's different again, though, right?
Yep.
So the actual license itself is not a subscription. You've got a subscription for an extension of all the bits and pieces and extra stuff that you offer with the Sphere, but the actual license itself is not. It's not a subscription. It's actually perpetual. Correct?
Yeah, as long as you've already bought it to start with, yes.
Yeah, but yeah. So, but if you haven't bought the license to start with, is there a subscription license with the Sphere? Is what I'm asking.
Yes, yeah. If you have no Studio One licensing and you join Sphere, you get every single product that's available to you to be able to activate.
All right. Okay. So that's clearer. Okay. All right.
So Studio One, Notion, all the plugins, you get the whole lot. Okay. And of course, you go off and you do projects, and then you can't live without it.
Yeah, well, that was the plan.
A different conversation.
that was the plan. Well, there you go. All right. Well, that's cool. I think we've covered that one. What I think we should do now is move on to, and we discussed this last time, and we've got some more information on the fallout from that AKM converter fire. So, look, we're 6 months on. We already knew that there was going to be some impacts in regards to audio interface supply. That we're right in the middle of that, and there is not a lot going on regards audio interfaces with high I/O with anyone, and unless they've actually made the change to the new converters, which is then having to navigate new controllers, new firmware, and in some instances, new drivers. So I'm already navigating that with some manufacturers. But there's a huge hole in the market. Chris, I think you can kind of give a little bit with that one as well.
there still is a huge hole. Some AKM is starting to come back onto the market. So we have a couple of interfaces that will ship to us next month for the first time in 12 months. But the supply is very small and is still months and months away. So a lot of products have moved away to try and source larger quantities. There are some companies that refuse. So I know with Apogee, they're refusing to move to a different converter. So they bought what they could early on, and they've managed to get through okay.
Yep.
Some things like some PreSonus interfaces, haven't seen them for a long time, and it's just dribbling in now, but still very much a problem.
So AKM is back up online. I thought they weren't going to be back online until middle to the end of this year.
In very, very small quantities.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So they're not. Yeah. It's going to be ages before they get to any kind of decent capacity.
Yeah, they're working out of the garage right now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And overloading the electrical supply on that garage, Yeah, that's kind of. I think that impact, we're still going to be feeling that for a while, because I've recently navigated some driver changes from an interface manufacturer that jumped early. Not jumped early, well, they were just they got in early and they shifted everything to the new converters. But that's resulted in, I don't know if there's been a controller change, but it's definitely resulted in a new driver family. And that's been interesting to navigate, which I've been helping with, and we have got a good result. But the initial thing was, wow, what happened here? And I'm wondering how that's going to be playing out for pretty much everyone that has moved to these alternate converters, because it's not as simple as just bolting the converter in, as you know. There's a whole stack of firmware changes to be made, clocking, all the rest of it. And then again, in some of them, it's actually resulted in a new driver family. So I'll be interested to see how RME actually tackle that, because I know that they're in the middle of navigating that at the moment, and I'm not sure how long it's going to be before we start seeing some of that other product.
I'm impressed that their AKM is actually back up and running in any capacity. So props to them for at least getting some things back online.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what was the initial prediction was going to be, the last time we spoke, I thought the initial prediction was going to be Q3 2022. So if they're back up at some capacity, yeah, it is good. But nowhere near enough. And imagine you've just gone and re-engineered a whole stack of products, and then all of a sudden the converters come back online. It's
yeah, and all of their machines and materials and everything that they're dealing with is the same stuff we have to deal with, where I'm sure they're running into shortages and inability to get certain parts and stuff just to rebuild.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's another two-edged sword. It's not only the converters, there's other IC chips as well, and FPGAs. There's shortages everywhere. So,
I mean, the actual stuff they need to manufacture those chips, if they're going to run into shortages getting that. So that's why I'm surprised they're up so early.
Yeah. Oh, you mean AKM themselves? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, look. It's let's take the positive, eh?
Yeah.
All right. This is the big one. CPU wars. So, in between our last conversation and now, Apple and Chris, you were correct. There was no new Mac Pro. Thank you. Congratulations.
You're welcome.
You read the tea leaves way better than me. I was thinking, no, they said the end of 2021. No, you read the tea leaves a lot better. So what they did release was there's a couple of models, M1 Max, and there was something else. Pro. And isn't the difference only the graphics on between those two?
Yeah, the GPU cores and the efficiency cores is the only difference.
Oh, so there is different numbers of efficiency cores. So M1 Max, that's 8 and 8, right? So it's eight performance cores and 8 efficiency cores. And, the hysteria surrounding these again. And, I was not overly positive in the last show, thinking that, if they deliver on their premise that x86 could have been in trouble. But in the meantime, Intel 12th Gen has come out. Well, let me just rephrase that. Intel have announced and released the 12th Gen. Has it hit the market in large quantity? No, because DDR5 is essentially non-existent, and that's where the performance gains are, which I'll explain. So with the Intel 12th Gen, what we found was there's two versions. There's a DDR4 and a DDR5. So on the CPU itself, from 11th to 12th Gen, there's probably been about a 20 to 30% IPC improvements, and instruction per clock has been up where they were predicting. Right, it's in the double figures, and it's quite good. It is actually quite good. And the main difference now is that you got your performance cores and your efficiency cores, which is thrown another couple of curves in, which I'll cover in a second as well. But with the DDR5, that's where the biggest improvement's been. So interestingly, in the DSP test, the plug-in test, which we're really talking instruction per clock and floating point type of processing, there was that, let's say 20%. In the virtual instrument one, the DDR4 one was kind of just scaling similar to the DSP between the 11th and 12th, but the DDR5, it just went through the roof. So for years we've been trying to work out why the X299 does so well on these contact virtual instrument tests, and it wasn't really memory speed. And I'm thinking, is it cache? Is it memory throughput? And it's memory bandwidth and throughput. That's what it is, memory bandwidth. And the DDR5 actually proved that. And you have to read a couple of articles I've read a couple to try and get my head around why there would have been such a massive improvement. We're talking 30-40% over the DDR4 machine in results on the contact test. And it just sat us on our ass. We're going, wow, what the hell have we discovered here? And Z690 was Z590 had a single 64-bit memory controller. Z690 has two 64-bit memory controllers. So in the DDR4 model, each memory controller feeds one channel, right? With the DDR5 has dual 32-bit channels. Now, I'm trying to get my head around how the way exactly how this is working. And the way that the two controllers are actually arbitrating is that they cross-reference each other. So to get the 64-bit, one 32-bit goes to one channel, the other 32-bit goes to the other one, and vice versa. So it's not, is it RAID? It's not like, it's kind of like a RAID. But look, I still trying to wrap my head around how this is working, but the actual modules themselves have got two 32-bit processing. It's not a 64-bit processor. It's a dual 32, and then the memory controllers are actually accessing those dual 32s in a manner that has given us this massive memory throughput and a huge improvement in contact. So it kind of answered the question that contact is very, very dependent on memory bandwidth, not speed as much. But the other interesting thing with the DDR5 was that as the actual speed increases, it's actually scaling up as well on the results. So very interesting stuff. The problem with DDR5 is that it's
unobtainium.
Yeah, there's none in the market, and if you can get it, most of it is 16-bit modules. So the most you can really run is 32, which is probably fine for most.
16 gig modules, yeah.
16 gig modules, yeah. So you can run, dual 32, but the pricing is just horrendous. I mean, it's just horrendous, and it's not like you can pick a particular favorite manufacturer or anything. It's just what's there. This is the price. I'm holding back. I've just crossed my arms. I've got a Z690 DDR4 system. This is for one of my smaller systems that I'm doing the development work on, just so I can knock out the Z690 R&D, and I'll worry about DDR5 when, one, it's actually more readily available, and two, that the prices become, get back to some level of sanity. Because if someone said to me, I need to go to 64 gigabyte on a DDR5, it'd be like a couple of grand just for the memory. And I've gone, no, it's not justifiable at the moment. And you can't run 4 modules without it just being an absolute cluster, So it's not quite there. And then that's kind of coupled up with a requirement of Windows 11, which we'll cover a little bit later. But regards, yep.
Vin, I'm just hoping that all these shortages and stuff end sometime soon, because it's gotten ridiculously expensive to build your own PC lately, and that's where all the enthusiasts are and people building for musicians and everything else, and so it's kind of sad to see that continue. Yeah,
well, look, for the non-muser, for the gamers, they can just build a DDR4 system, and I doubt they would even feel the difference with DDR5 in those type of gaming environments. They're probably zero.
Maybe it depends on how far they're pushing things like textures and stuff. But yeah. But for sure, Contact and big sample libraries and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, that's the one that really sat us on our ass. We're going, wow, what have we stumbled into here? So there's no reason for me to release those higher end Z690 systems on DDR4. There's just it's better just I'll do a smaller system on the DDR4, and then I'll deal with the DDR5 based systems when everything settles down a bit. And really, there's no timeline of when that stuff's going to be happening. We just don't know, And the other thing, there was motherboard shortages for a while, and then they're priced through the roof as well. And here's the best one. There are no professional preferred heatsink fans to fit the new Socket 1700. So it's like, hang on.
No Noctua or anything like that?
No, be quiet. Well, I mean, there's some mounting kits. Pete over in the UK managed to get some. There's none floating around in Australia. So when I say none, there is zero. And if there were any, they sold out in a heartbeat. So even for my development machine, I had to grab a cooler that we'll call it non-preferred. I think it'll be fine for my development stuff, but there's no way I'm going to be releasing systems with that cooler. But that's the situation I'm at the moment. So I'm sitting there trying to put a development system together. I can't even get anything to cool the thing. So it's kind of a bit, it's definitely challenging at the moment. But now, Chris, have you got anything you'd like to add with the M1 performance stuff? Because you've been across it, and you said that you were doing some testing recently. Can you give us a little bit of insight on how you're finding the M1 performance? And in the meantime, I mean, between the last conversation, you bought yourself a new Monster Mac Pro, so you can tell us about that as well.
I have. I've actually had the Mac Pro for a little bit of time. But it's interesting because I speak to a lot of clients, a lot of customers ring wanting to have these conversations about what kind of computer they should buy. Should I buy a Mac? Should I buy a Windows machine? And it's confusing. There are so many options. There are so many tests out there that don't really add up in the way that they've been tested.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some interesting one. I came across an interesting one just a couple of days ago that I thought I could share.
Mm-hmm.
It was a performance review for an M1 Max on a 12th gen i9 12900HK, which is actually coming out of a MSI GE76 Raider gaming laptop.
Yep.
And it basically said Intel wins. And I clicked on that and I went, this is interesting. Let's have a read. And it was interesting because what ended up coming out of this, and look, Cinebench and Geekbench testing suites, we spoke about this previously. They do a certain thing. They are certainly not they can't always be trusted to be real world. You talk about people complaining about DAWbench not being real world. I mean, how real world is Cinebench?
Yeah.
It's just not, right? But what was interesting about the two tests, and this i9 being a 14-core processor, was that when they ran the Geekbench tests and the video encoding benchmarks against the M1 Max, that the Intel was only really about 1% or 5% better result than the actual M1, which was interesting. It wasn't that much better. When they ran the Cinebench test, especially on the multi-core benchmarking, while the Intel just smashed it by about 30%.
Right.
So 30% increase on that core benchmark. However, that's not really a surprise because the Intel is a 14-core
Oh, no, but hang on. Think about it.
Hang on.
It's not a 14-core. It's only 8. There would be only 8 performance cores. The others are the efficiency cores.
6 performance cores, I think, in this laptop and 8 efficiency cores, right?
Right,
Okay, so it's that's the breakdown of it.
Yep.
But the Intel does have hyper-threading, right? And it does have, I think, is it 20 virtual cores on top of that? I think they quoted. Where the M1 Pro and M1 Max are 10-core chips and have no hyper-threading. They're just 10 cores, right? Yep. So it absolutely got caned, which is to be expected because of that M1 architecture.
Different pipelining on the M1, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The interesting part was the second part, which is the part that they put right down the bottom, which was that during that Cinebench test, that the M1 used about 34 watts of power.
Yep.
The i9 peaked at 94 watts.
Yep.
A massive, significant increase, like 200%, right? Yep. So it was stated in the article that it was 200% more power consumption to get about 30% more performance.
Yep.
And I went, okay, that kind of makes some sense. That's not completely outside of the realms of what my understanding of it was. But then I started looking at these machines, right? And in Australia here, this M1 Max, this is a $5,000 laptop, right? This is not a cheap machine. And the MSI here in Australia currently is about a $7,000 machine. So it's like a $2,000 difference. Now, but this does have DDR5 RAM, and it does have NVMe PCI SSDs in there. So it's a monster machine. It also is 1 inch thick, and when it runs at full power, it sounds a little bit like an air conditioner running.
Oh, of course it would.
where obviously the M1 doesn't. But I just started thinking to myself, this is very interesting because what does happen in these next gen M1 processors that come out, what does happen when they add more cores? What does happen when they juice them up a little bit if they want to? I mean, at the moment, they've produced a chip, a CPU that's very efficient. It's got quite a bit of power. And these laptops are running 17 hours of battery life. I'm assuming the MSI, which, by the way, I could not find anywhere online how many hours the battery goes for.
10 minutes, I think.
So my point with all this is that, we do still need to compare apples with apples. And the reality right now is that it's very difficult to compare these M1s with anything. Yeah. We can run these tests and we can run some of these plug-in tests. But, with a big gap like that and an article, online not really mentioning the gap on price, to me, it's just, I think that just takes end users to more confusion than they already have.
Okay. Well, let me add my 2 cents with that one, right? So the power per watt, that's always the argument that's going to come back to, right? And it's not only Apple, the AMD guys use that as well. If Intel kind of edge ahead with anything, they'll say, oh yeah, but what about power per watt? Now, we already knew power per watt with the Apple Silicon and the ARM processors. That's their forte, and that's why Apple pretty much essentially went, stuff Intel, these things are turning into space heaters and again, so they ran into the same problem with the PAL PCs, remember? They couldn't get the speed and they couldn't get the heat dissipation out. So power per watt, I understand it, right? And look, the whole laptop thing, it's a whole different area, right? So and that's where Apple are going to just sit there and go, well, this is how much power we've got. This is how much power we're drawing, and this is how long you can run it out in the field. There isn't a x86. You can't compare the x86 comparisons, right? So no. They've won that one, right? I'll give them that one, right?
And they've convinced everybody that they need laptops instead of desktops.
Yeah, correct.
That's the other thing.
Correct. Yeah. But bringing back to my point, I do want to compare the M1. Because that's all we've got, right? I do need to compare the M1 Max against desktops because I don't want to compare them against laptops, right? I want to because the premise was that this thing was going to smash x86 out of the water, right?
Okay, so I ran some tests. Would you like to hear some numbers?
Yes, please.
I used your very current and new DAWbench version.
Yes, let's just be very specific with the people listening in. I built an internal version. It's not publicly available yet, but if someone really wants it, they can message me. It's an internal version that is using the bundled RXC compressor in Reaper. And the reason that I did that instead of the standalone version, and the reason I did that was that we can run that natively on M1, the Apple Intels, and the x86 Windows machines, right? Where before with the standalone, I couldn't have any, I didn't have any reference plugin that would run across all of them. And there are native versions of Reaper for the M1. So I need to be clear, it's not running through Rosetta, right? These are native, right? Okay, sorry, Chris, go.
Okay, so again, apples with apples, right?
Yep.
I mean, obviously my 2019 Mac Pro, my machine spec is it's a 3.3 gig 12-core Xeon.
24 thread, yep, beautiful.
Yep, it's 48 gig of RAM. I've actually got two W57X graphics cards in there and also the Afterburner card. Now, we did have some M1 Max benchmarks that were run, is that via scan? Was that right? Those numbers? The
ones that I initially sent you for this internal stuff, yes. Mm-hmm. The M1 numbers and the 12900 numbers were run by the fellas at Scan, yes.
Okay. So at 64 buffers, they were running 189.
On which one? On the M1?
On the M1 Max.
Yep, 189, yep.
189?
Yep.
I ran 240 on my desktop.
On the Big Mac Pro?
Yep.
What about, did you run your little M1?
Not yet.
Okay, that's all right.
And that number is the number of tracks you're able to run?
No, that's the number of plugins.
Number of plugins.
Number of plugins, sorry.
Yeah, number of plugins, yep.
And it went up significantly. On 128 buffers, we were talking about 198 versus 255.
Yep.
At 256, it was 199 versus 265.
Yep.
And at 512, 213 versus 268. So there's some significant performance on the Xeon.
Yep.
There's also a significant difference in price on the two machines. But, yes.
What's the clock speed of the Xeon?
3.3.
Yeah, no, that's base clock. Do you know what it turbos up to? It would be, I'll take a guess. It would be up around 4 gigahertz.
I'm not too sure, but I think that sounds about right.
Yeah, it'd be up around 4.1. Okay, so that's good. Okay, so that gives us a good indicator, right? But we're still talking 12 core, 24 thread versus the 8 core of the M1 Max.
Yeah.
I've got the 12900 results, which I sent you. Are they higher than your Mac? You haven't got it in front of you, have you?
I don't have it in front of me, sorry, but you caught me out there. I'll have to see if I can grab it.
I'm going to pause for a second because I'm going to find these numbers. Give me a second.
Yeah, we'll just play some music while you look for it.
Yeah, you guys have a chat and I'm going to find these numbers.
Yeah. Chris, one thing I was thinking when you talked about some of those numbers there, they always show the video encoding one, but I'm always a little suspect of that because doesn't the M1 have a specific video encoding accelerator section on the processor?
This is where it gets interesting because I run my Mac Pro for video, and there's two parts of it. There's the part where you're in the project and you're skimming across 3 or 4 video tracks that are very high intensive, like some of them can be 200 gig a file. That part in Final Cut, for example, is very much GPU accelerated based, or if you have a Thunderbird Afterburner card, it helps with the skimming and the playback of those files.
Right.
When you bounce, say, a 1 hour video, bounce isn't the right word. When you export the project out, that processing part of that export, what is very interesting is that even the standard M1s in a Mac Mini variant, they're about 15% slower than the Mac Pro as far as the export go. They're very, very close. Now, on the M1 Max, some of these M1 Max laptops can export a project that I have on my Mac Pro in around about the same time as what the Mac Pro can, purely on processing the export file out. So a lot of the results you see there, they do emphasize that section because they have got that to go very fast. And I assume that's part of their efficiency neutron core that does the 6 trillion instructions a second or whatever it is. So that aspect of these machines for the money is superb. But
isn't it for a specific...
It's rendering. It's rendering.
It's rendering, but isn't it even more than that? It's a specific codec format.
Yeah, you got to use ProRes. But it's mostly the generic stuff that you would use in Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve anyway.
Okay.
So or Photoshop, if you were doing Photoshop stuff and you're rendering photos, it's that speed.
Okay.
It's very fast. It's a little bit hard to stomach spending $10,000 on a Mac Pro when a $2,000 Mac Mini can render those files out just as quick. The part that people don't read into is what actually happens when I'm in a project, what actually happens when I'm trying to do a multi-camera cut, and that's where the processing and the cores on those M1s, they're not stacking up in that area. And they probably shouldn't be because they're quite a lot cheaper as far as the base machine goes. So, if you're doing photo stuff, if you're doing that kind of editing, if you're doing single track 4K video, there's a lot of power in these little machines. There's M1 machines, no doubt about it. And that's the figures they give you. When every time you look at a result, it's like, yep, our rendering is awesome. Now in DAW world, we render very, very little. We might have a 5-minute song, we might have a 10-minute song, we might do an export, and our render time is usually less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Trying to render 3 hours of video, previous to having machines like Mac Pros would take like 6 hours.
Yep.
So there's not a massive amount of benefit on a 2019 Mac Pro necessarily in DAW world, other than I can load in hundreds of plugins, which I'm probably never going to do in that situation. But for doing video stuff, it's massive. It's a massive leap, no doubt about it. So I consider those two different things.
Yeah, and I was always wondering with the video benchmarks, like what does that mean for 8K or the next K of videos there? Because it seems very specialized. Now, that's super useful for everybody, but when you start getting into the pro segments of people who would buy those, it seems a little disingenuous to use that as the benchmark.
Yeah, it does. And also, too, often or not, the benchmark tests they do are on 35 seconds of video clip.
Yeah.
It's not a real world, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or 1 hour. Now, I can't, even on my Mac Pro here now, with the Afterburner card, which is the 16-slot PCI FPGA assisted processing card, that I can run, 6 streams of 8K video in RAW which I can't do without that card put in. So that another very specialized piece of video equipment, that afterburn card. But it does get you thinking a little bit about FPGA hardware assisted stuff for DAWs as well. You know, we've got all these great machines with all these PCI slots that do nothing. You know, why not a bit of an old school FPGA hardware assisted card in there for DAWs?
Yeah.
You know, I don't get it.
It seems like an untapped market to have more onboard DSP, whether it's FPGA or something else on PCs.
Oh, 100%. You know, you look at it and you look at all the available PCI lanes in these machines, and you go, surely.
Now there are some that do that, but it's just not as common, I think.
No, well, it's going back into Pro Tools HD territory, isn't it?
Well, or UAD.
Right. The Universal is the one I was thinking of.
And then and we're going to have that whole native versus DSP argument, which I've been navigating since about 2008, 2009. So it's interesting, Chris, but I think where the difference and the difficulty is, because, you know, with that same premise, why haven't they leveraged the GPUs? All right. Some people have attempted it. It was
excellent question.
Yeah. Some people have attempted it in the past, ended up in a steaming mess because it's you know what it is? It's the low latency real time aspect that we require that they can't navigate around. Right.
No.
And the it took UAD a long time to actually navigate that low latency area, which I probably discussed in past shows, and I won't kind of sidetrack it here, but they had it took a long time for them to get that DSP happy around in those lower latencies. Pro Tools is, I mean, HDSP, not HDSP, sorry. Pro Tools HD and HDX, that whole area is very, very different because it's so tightly meshed in and integrated within the DAW itself. There isn't anything else out there. I mean, Pyramix maybe, you know, but HDX is still pretty much the one that is still most heavily entrenched with that DSP, and they're moving away. If you have a look at some of their new products, they're leaning more and more onto minimal DSP, more for the mixing engine, you know, the audio mixing engine, and the rest of it is they're leaning more and more on native. So so you're saying we should head back to DSP where
everyone else is saying not to. But, you know, the interesting thing about it, though, is I think what also happens parallel to everything being native, and I'm not against native, don't get me wrong, but some of these plugins that are coming out now, they're also levering on the processing power that's available in some of these new CPUs. So some of their plugins are getting bigger and fatter and better sounding.
Yep.
But at some point, we can also run less of them. So it is an interesting argument, but you're right. It's the real-time aspect of moving across a DAW on the timeline is very different to background rendering.
Yep.
Because on a video project, you can background render. You don't go back to that session. You don't need to look at it. It's not really a big problem. But it does still seem like it's an untapped space to me.
Well, people have attempted it, like I said, Chris, but it didn't work out. And the whole FPGA DSP, that is happening. That's happening on some interfaces, like Antelope are using FPGA, and I think some of the PreSonus DSP is running on FPGA. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Well, that's a little different from like coprocessor type stuff, though.
Yeah.
That makes sense. One last comment from me on this is, and maybe this is a topic for some other show sometime, but the other thing that, and especially with the M1, that seems untapped for audio is the neural network / AI acceleration stuff. Like, I would like to see some of the companies doing more with that, especially when you get down to mixing and rendering and stuff.
Yeah. Well, look, and hey, by the way, I've got the 12900K results for that internal RXC test. Would you like?
Oh, good.
Would you like them?
Yep.
Okay, so M1 Max. I forgot what your Mac Pro was, but it was a little bit higher than I got M1 Max, and I've got the 12900K results ready. So it's at 064. M1 Max is 189. 12900K is 428. All right.
Ooh.
Pause for effect. Right. At 128. It was 198 on the M1 Max. It was 448 on the 12900K. It was 199 at 256, so it only went up 1 on the M1 Max. It's 461 on the 12900K, and on the M1 Max at 512, it was 213 total. It's 475 on the 12900K. Now, what kind of a conclusion we can draw on that? Not much, except that is absolutely flying in the face of some of the other DAW comparative performance benchmark results that I've seen on some other websites, which I won't mention because I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. But they have generated a massive amount of hysteria that these Apple Silicon are going to be smashing everything in DAW work, and they're using a couple of very prominent DAWs to do their testing. Now, why is this one so different? Is it because of Reaper? So this is why I'm not drawing a conclusion yet, right? Is it because of Reaper's native port, right? But that's not a small difference. That's not a small difference, Chris.
Bit of a question here. Do you think there's a big difference between how the DAW handles an inbuilt native plugin versus something that is a VST host?
Well, I know the figures of the 12900K using my standalone build, right? Hang on, have I got them?
Drum roll, please.
Yeah, I've got them. Hang on, I have to turn around, but you'll hear these, right? So on the
that's the shattered glass audio plugin, right?
No, this is the Reaper RXC with the Rio X comp, right? So I've got a special build of it that Justin did for me, and that's my reference plugin that I use for the plugins, right? But it's a standalone VST2 version, and the results were, hang on, I'll make it easy, 366 to 396. So the internal one was far more efficient, right? And the reason I had to go to the internal one is because we've got native builds for OS X and we've got native builds for Apple Silicon, right? So the question is it just the efficiency of the port between the Mac and the Windows machine, and the Mac and Windows version, or is the 12900K smacking the M1 very heavily around the head, right? So you could probably answer that question a little bit better, Chris, with other DAWs when you get a second, right? So, how is Studio One under some?
No, the numbers are lower. Running the same test in Studio One don't get the same numbers.
On which test? Sorry.
On the internal, I ran the same test with a shattered glass audio plugin.
Oh, yeah.
Because I could just have the plugin in both DAWs fairly quickly on the same interface.
Yep.
And yeah, the numbers are lower. They're probably 30% less plugins able to be loaded before audio starts to break up.
On the shattered glass, right, in Studio One.
Yes.
And the M1 was lower.
Yes.
So,
however, you bring up the EQs and stuff that are in Studio One native. When I say native, built in, let's not say native, that's a different word.
Yep.
Then those numbers double. You can run way more of those.
On which?
In Studio One.
On you run way more on which though?
Like one of the EQs that
but which CPU was running higher with
on the Mac Pro.
Right.
Or both CPUs, actually. Both on the M1 and on the Mac Pro, you could run far more Pro EQs, almost double than what you could running Shattered Glass Audio plugin on both.
But the delta between the Pro and the M1 is still similar, or the same general relationship on those is what I'm hearing.
It appears so, yeah.
Right, but we don't have an x86 comparative, that's all.
No.
So was this done in Studio One, this test?
No, the test of the numbers I gave you was done in Reaper.
Right, even with
just so we could match the 2009, the Mac Pro to the M1 Max,
and with the shattered glass stuff as well, right? Oh no,
yes,
but the shattered the numbers you gave me were with the RXC though, weren't they? Or
sorry, they were shattered glass audio. The 240 on the 64 was a shattered glass audio plugins.
Right, so you didn't run my internal RXC one.
No, I need to do that for next time.
Okay.
There's a lot of tests to run. We need to do a summary.
Yeah.
Yes, I was just going to say that. So I'm confused as to which number is which. So anybody listening has to be wondering what to take away from all this.
Okay, so I mean Chris did. Let's keep Chris's test separate to mine then, right? So the ones that we've done is an M1 Max versus a 12900K using internal builds of RXC, right, which are all running native, right? So it's not a wrapped plugin, it's not a Rosetta, right? And there was a massive difference. So we need to kind of reconvene on this one as well, and we need to do it across multiple doors. So that's my next project.
That's where it starts getting messy because the results are different across multiple doors.
Well, this is the point I was making, right? So as soon as I go public with my internal results, I could just imagine the scream from the peanut gallery, especially from the Mac fraternity. They're going to be going, but Reaper's crap. It'll be Reaper's fault, So this is why I want to run a similar test across multiple DAWs. The problem there is going to be
that you have to use a VST plugin.
What's a reference plugin? Yeah. So and what's a native? Are there any reference plugins that I can use that are actually Apple native yet? So that you don't have to answer that now, but that's the thing that we can ponder.
That's the only real way to get a comparison.
So the takeaway is don't draw any conclusions just yet.
No,
it's a bit too early.
Yeah. But this is what I've said when I was reading some of those articles where they're just hyping this thing as the giant killer, and I've gone, well, I've just done a simple test with applications that are meant to be native to the M1, and it's getting absolutely pillared. So
that's because don't draw any conclusions doesn't make for a good headline.
No, correct. Yeah, but that hasn't stopped others from sitting there and doing major headlines and nice clickbait articles. But
of course not.
I mean, what's interesting is that if you look at a lot of the reports from across multiple doors about native and non-native M1 code, a lot of these doors are running pretty well in Rosetta, without being native still. So it is interesting about how much rule performance a door can get with a native code, and just how far off software companies still are from, having everything in the native M1 code. Because still a lot of stuff doesn't run. There's still a lot of plugins mostly. Absolutely, some of them just don't run very well natively, but they still run pretty well in Rosetta. So, you sit there and go, well, it's a bit hard to know what I'm actually looking at here.
You've just given me an idea.
Yeah.
You've just given me an idea. I am going to get the boys in the UK with the M1 Max to run the Reaper non-Apple Silicon native version. Just run the old x86 version.
Oh, see if it processes differently.
Correct.
That's interesting.
So that's my little project, and then I'm going to have some comparative numbers against the thing running in Rosetta and the thing running natively, and if the numbers come out the same, you can draw your own conclusion there about how native the native is, right? So let's just leave that one there, but there's still a huge question mark there, and I'm feeling way better than I was 6 months ago that Apple are going to be just sweeping the floor, because the Mac Pro didn't eventuate, and there's not a lot of talk about when these big Uber CPU.
No, I did see yesterday the rumors that there's 2 new Mac Minis, but they will just be coming out with the M1 Max and Pro chips, so they'll mimic the laptops.
So where's the big Uber chip?
Still not here. The rumor mill is still saying next year.
Well, so much for end of 2021. So you were correct, Chris, and you can take a bow there, my friend. That was you were right.
I think the only conclusion we can draw is that across all these machines and across all these platforms, there's excellent music to be made.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, of course, mate. You can make excellent music on a bloody Android or an iPhone. So there you go. The thing for me is that if from all the hype that they were generating, that this thing was, there was going to be a Mac Uber Apple Silicon machine. If you're saying by the middle of the year, Intel have their new HEDT platform. All right, so the replacement to X299 HEDT, that's going to be very, very interesting. I don't know whether they're going to go big or little on that. I'm kind of hoping they don't actually, but even if they do or they don't, that with the IPC improvements, the DDR5, that thing is going to be through the roof. So Apple may be getting caught with their pants down. So that's going to, the next TechBytes, guys, because we're going to reconvene in 6 months, right?
Right.
Once that HEDT thing lands, that's going to be very, very interesting. And I think Apple, Apple's prediction of, changing the game in that higher space is they're going to have a battle on their hands. So that's kind of interesting. And just on that point, really quickly, there's been some moving and shaking going around between Apple and Intel land, where they've been kind of kidnapping each other's. Not kidnapping,
right?
They've been there's some chip engineers, major chip engineers, and interesting that, and I'll bring up 3 names, right? Jim Keller was one guy that is, like a legend in the chip engineering. And he was the guy behind the Athlon when he was with AMD and the hypertransport and all of that type of stuff, which is brilliant. And then he was involved with Zen as well, went back to, and then moved from AMD, then came back for the Zen. And then he's done some work with Apple. That he went to Intel, and Intel thought, mate, what a score. This is the guy behind the Zen, and, he's probably got some nice little tidbits of what's going on with Apple as well. But that whole tenure at Intel, nothing. That's when they were asleep. So that was a real interesting one. And then he kind of left. He left, and this guy called Pat Gelsinger came back, and I've mentioned him before. He was like the main chip engineer that was behind the Core and i7 and all of that. Left in 2009. He's come back, and within the last 18 months, Intel have just found their feet again. So you can read in between the lines there. But since Jim's left the building and this guy's come back in, they've accelerated their architecture performance through the roof. So you can read whatever you want there. And the interesting one for me is a guy called Jeff Wilcox, who was originally in Intel. And then he's one of the chief engineers behind the Apple Silicon. And guess where he's gone?
Yep.
Back to Intel. So, man, there must be some checkbooks flying around under these guys' noses.
Checkbooks and you're when you said read anything into it, it could be that something culturally changed at Intel that has attracted these people back, as opposed to them making the changes that you're seeing publicly. There's always that question of, did somebody in management finally get their crap together?
Yeah, I think Pat Gelsinger coming back, them luring Pat back is definitely dragging back some of the guys that had probably left in frustration in the earlier years. So there you go. Yeah. So that's an interesting one. And this Jeff Wilcox guy is apparently an SoC expert, system on chip. So that'll be interesting to see where that comes from. What comes from.
Hey, Vin, I want to say one last thing about the M1, if we could here.
Yep.
Because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I think we're all pretty impressed with what Apple did. This is more about just drilling down to the facts of how does it actually perform in comparison to these other CPUs.
Well, that was always my point. What they've delivered and the power per watt and everything else is great. I just had my nose out of joint with the hysteria that this thing was just going to be wiping the floor with everything, and it's not really coming.
I mean, if you want a mobile solution where you're off recording in different spaces and excellent battery life and a really nice screen, I don't think there's anything else that compares right now.
I sell x86, dual laptops as well. I'll be the first to admit, run on a battery. What? No, don't run on it. Don't run on it. Because a few people ask me, what's the battery life on these? I went, I have no idea. They go, what do you mean? Don't you run on a battery? I'm going, no, man, I'm running a ultimate performance profile on this thing. It's basically set up as a DAW. You don't know. I have no idea what the battery life is, and you don't run it on a battery. My whole thing with laptops is that they're purely for mobile recording. Out in the field, how many people actually go out there and record on battery though?
I think most people who buy laptops don't actually need a laptop. That's just what they think they need. But that's a separate discussion.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's good to be mobile, and if you're out in a live recording environment and everything else, but if you're recording a concert or a live gig on a laptop, you wouldn't be running on the battery.
Right, yeah.
Or performing live with laptops on stage, you wouldn't be running on a battery. Well, I don't know, maybe some are, but I wouldn't think it'd be overly wise.
I see a lot of laptops in home studios, and I still don't understand that.
That one has my head scratching, but that's a whole other discussion. Hey, real quickly, Windows 11, Pete. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I haven't really dived in just yet. But I do want to make a couple of comments. I think the uptake has been quite lax. There hasn't been a huge uptake. And my only experience with it was a very short one with one of my boys has just got his Windows 11 school laptop. And I was just immediately frustrated because I'm looking at it going, well, okay, here's the taskbar. He didn't like the idea of the thing being in the middle, so I went, okay, more familiarity, move it to the left. We're talking about the start menu, right? And the next thing, really basic thing I wanted to do was just minimize the size of the taskbar because it's a big fat thing down the bottom. And I right-click and I go, where's the option gone? And it's just not there. So my question is, was that a decision?
Yeah, so some of the things are decisions, and some of them are just what we had time to do, right? So there's the taskbar is all new code, and the start menu and stuff. All that stuff's all new code compared to what we had before. And there have actually been a number of small updates to it over Windows 11's release so far. And so it'll get there. If you look in the feedback hub, there are lots of entries for different things that folks want to see. And I know that the teams are looking at that. So yeah, it'll get there. And I'm not going to comment on the actual numbers of uptake. It's been pretty good, actually. But for musicians and folks like this, I'd say, give it a little bit before you dive in. Just because there's nothing musician specific that's compelling in Windows 11 until you start getting into those new Intel chips.
Yeah, and I was about to say that. But so I've got, and the reason I've held off is that I've had really no reason to even look at Windows 11 just yet, and some of my older development machines won't even run it. So that's an area of contention that they cut off the CPU.
Well, it's all security focused, but yeah, we won't get into a long discussion. But a lot of folks misunderstand that cutoff as being performance related, but it's security related,
right? And that brings us into the TPM, trusted platform module, and we're going to be going around in circles because, my whole thing is if anything with the word trusted in it, in the title, I tend not to trust.
It is actually worth looking into over time. Like the TPM is useful for things like encryption and saving you from ransomware that encrypts your drive and stuff like that. There's a lot of craptastic stuff out there that this is really trying to save us from.
Yeah, but my only response to that is, why is it enforced? We've managed to survive all this time without that being enforced on us, And
Dude,
now,
that's like saying why are seatbelts required?
No,
I lived through it in the 80s, so
well, no, well, yes,
survivor bias, right?
yeah, can't. Well, I hate using analogies, but I don't agree with that analogy because we've managed to survive right up until the 11th gen, right, without any of these hard requirements. So, we're not going to.
No, they were in place as requirements for new laptop manufacturers.
Yes.
For a number, like 2016, I think is when we started doing that. But yeah, for individual system builders, it wasn't a requirement.
Well, interestingly, all of the laptops, even my laptops, the trusted platform module is always disabled. Up until, with Windows 10, I never enable it, never, right? So if you're saying it's a requirement, it's not. It's actually, might be a requirement to actually list it in the BIOS, but it was never enabled. So
it was a requirement for, I don't want to get you in trouble, Vin. If you're an OEM selling laptops, it was actually a requirement for the licensing of Windows.
I'm not an OEM. I'm
okay.
I'm not an original equipment manufacturer. I don't manufacture but it was there. I'm saying it's in the BIOS.
So what I would suggest actually is we should get Dwizzle, who is one of our security experts, who is also a musician, as a guest on the show at some point, just to at least explain the thinking behind it and kind of what the requirements really mean.
Okay. All right. Well,
I think that would be helpful.
And my other thing with the TPM is that there are regions around the world that have builds of Windows 11 that TPM are not a requirement. So that's probably another thing that gets under my, I get that. Gets a little bit of a bug. So the only other, So look, I haven't dabbled with it, and I'm being force fed into it because of the 12th gen. Personally, and I've mentioned this to you offline, is that I would love for that thread director capability to be put into Windows 10 because it gives us some more breathing space, and then Windows 11 becomes a choice, not a requirement, right? So it just feels to me that we've been forced to it with 12th gen, and the 12th gen rollout has been a pig at the best of times, and then have been force fed into the Windows 11 environment. To me, just some aspects of Windows 11 feels it's not completed. It's just not finished, especially that taskbar area. I just went, it's only a small thing, but I've gone, it is only a small thing, but it just feels it's not finished. It feels unfinished to me. So I'm be watching where Windows 11 goes. I'm hoping it's not another Windows 8.
No, I don't think it is. But also, I think that over time here, you're going to see some of those things clear up. Like I said, I run Windows 11 on all the PCs I have here, and the taskbar options and whatnot have changed significantly since it was first released. So there are improvements there. Right. So folks are listening.
Well, can you get them to actually just bring back the really basic option of using small icons and minimizing the size of that huge taskbar? That'll be
that would be nice. But I never use it. I wonder if you've ever put in a feedback hub entry on that.
No, I haven't. Well, I am an insider, but I haven't done anything on that one. And I doubt they'd be listening to one little person in Melbourne.
They actually do. Once you get enough of them in there, then the teams do look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All righty. Well, I've only got one more thing on our run sheet here, and it's listed as in the trenches. In other words, let's pick up a little bit on some, if we've got any product support quirks that we'd want to share. Chris?
We briefly touched on it before. I think most of what I'm hearing on the phone right now is frustration between people not knowing what platform to jump onto and people buying machines that aren't doing what they need them to do.
Okay. A couple of weeks ago, you were telling me about a client that it was more a session logistics thing, and the way that he was running the session with a whole stack of single instruments instead of running them into multi.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was an interesting one. So we were briefly talking a little bit about how sessions are formed, mostly in the way that people, I guess maybe this references back to, DAWbench test with busing, is that people have different session setups.
Yep.
And I think their session setups have been what they've been doing for a long period of time, completely unaware about how it affects their processor. So whether you line up 50 tracks with one plugin each on them, or whether you have 50 tracks and everything buses to one bus that then has 15 plugins on it, it can greatly vary your performance. And I did have a client running Contact and completely unaware that Contact is a multi-instrument plugin, and that it can have 16 instances of an instrument in the one loaded Contact session. And was literally by no means of no one's ever really told him, and he hasn't really done any research on it, had 16 versions on Contact open with one instrument each in them. And this was a bit of a like, so that you can do it this way, right? No, I never knew that, and it does go to show sometimes that we get into habits of the way that we run sessions and what we've been doing, and that occasionally there's better ways to do it. So, we got him back a bunch of CPU resources straight back off the bat, literally because we could shut down 15 versions in Contact that didn't need to be there. And I've been doing a lot of that, just asking people, I'm running 15 versions of the Waves EQ, and it's maxing out my CPU. And brief question of, have you ever tried the actual one that comes built with a DAW, the standard one? You can probably run way more of those, and you know what? It probably sounds just as good. Have you ever compared them? I've never compared them. So you sit there sometimes and feel like there's more information and knowledge that needs to be given out. Occasionally that can really help people. Because I've noticed a big thing, and I we talked a little bit about some results before, but there is a big difference between plugins that are built into DAWs as opposed to ones that we're loading in via VST, VS3, or AU units externally. There does seem to be a difference, And
of course there is.
Don't be scared to try that. Don't be scared to load the stock EQ and have a listen to it, because you might be surprised how good it sounds.
And just on that point with the Contact, that was really interesting, and we did have an extended conversation that day, is that with the Contact multi-instrument, that is how I ran my DAWbench sessions for over a decade, right? And everyone's crossing their arms going, no, mate, that's not the way to do it. And the Contact multiprocessing actually interferes with the DAW multiprocessing. And even Steinberg have told us that directly. They didn't contact me, but they contacted Pete, right? And they just said, we have a problem with your DAWbench session because of the multiprocessing, and that interferes with our threading. And you should be running single Contact instances with the single instruments. This is how the new DAWbench session came about. I completely got rid of the multiprocessing version of Contact and went into the single instrument. That's why we have 496 instances of Contact in Reaper now. Mind you, a lot of those are actually disabled and offline, but that's the size of the template, right? So it's in complete reverse. And again, this is recommendations from multiple DAW developers. I've heard it from some others as well, that you need to switch off Contact's multi-instrument, multi-processing internal, and run single instances, all right? And where you've just found the complete opposite, and the client got the advantage from it. Now, I will say this, a lot of my composer clients, high-end composer clients running Cubase and Contact, and they've been running with the multi-instrument environments for years without a problem. So for Steinberg to say, oh, no, you need to be disabling it because it's detrimental. Well, it hasn't been, and because they were saying, oh, that's just your benchmark. Well, it's not just a benchmark because these guys have never even run my benchmark. These guys are professional film composers, right? So I'm saying to them, it might be an idea not to run, 16 instruments per. And they go, well, that's how we actually group the instruments, the orchestral instruments together. I've gone, okay. So
frustrating to not be able to take advantage of a plugin that is, trying to help you out.
Yeah, but so just on that point, it helped your client. I have been suggesting that to multiple clients over the years, but the more common practice now seems to be run the single instances, and especially with instrument tracks. When they're just calling up an instrument track. All right. And it's more difficult if you call up an instrument track to then actually get your head around how the multi-instrument's going to be working and how it's going to be threading. But Kontakt with the multiprocessing has always worked very, very well in my experience for a lot of my professional composer clients. And that was within Cubase mostly. It worked very, very well in Reaper. You've just told me it works very, very well in Studio One. So again, it's a two-edged sword. And the VST3 version of Kontakt allows 64 instruments. I don't think I'd recommend running 64 instruments in an instance.
No.
But running 4, 8 or multiple instead of having, this massive number, I still would have no problem suggesting that to people. But I redid the DAWbench session as individual instruments, just to kind of just to remove that question mark of how the Kontakt multiprocessing could be affecting the actual DAW load balancing and multi-threading. So that's the main reason I did it. But I agree, it's just and there's conflicting information as well. So it's very difficult for that end user, and I bet you he'd be wrapped because he would have gone, well, hang on, look at that. Immediate improvement.
Yep.
Lower resource. Put your head down and keep working. So I think that one, that's a tick. I look, I don't have a lot of product support stuff that I can share online, but I can give one instance of recent one where, and this is one that I'd like Pete to kind of chime in on. Is that, and this is just a classic working environment, right? So he's got a desktop, but he's also got a laptop that he uses because he travels around on a lot of remote stuff. And on the laptop, there's a requirement. There's an Adobe. We'll call it an Adobe requirement, right? So Adobe likes to enforce that it has to be a certain version of Windows to run a certain update. So this laptop has had various Windows 10 inline upgrade. We'll call them upgrades because they're not updates. We're going major jumps, right, in revisions of Windows. And the last one, to get all of his Adobe stuff working, and I think there was some other video editing stuff, it completely, I'm talking completely hosed the Cubase performance, completely, right, to the point where he's going, I can't even play back a really basic session. And so this was a Windows version that got brought up to, I think, 2004, but it was, I think it may have been originally an early 1511 or something like that. So the point is that it was an inline update. It wasn't an online one. I do inline ones, right? I had to go in, and he actually did it himself because I didn't have time to actually remote in that week. I had to go in and I spent a good amount of time having to re-optimize everything on that Windows 10 install that had been shifted via the update. And I got the performance back. But, my point was where everyone, people got their arms crossed going, I just do a blanket update, everything will be fine. Well, it's not always, Pete. I'm treading carefully here.
Yeah.
Not always. This was an absolute basket case, right?
I wonder if that was so there was one update where we had a huge DPC issue. I think it was
No, that's 1903. Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't DPC related. It was completely hosed. The Cubase was just spiking, and it was just horrible. So I just went. I went back to ground zero and did all my re-optimizations again and saw what had been changed, because quite a few of them had been reversed and changed. And on this specific laptop, we got the performance back, and he's just going, bloody hell. How the hell would anyone else have worked that out? I went, they would have reinstalled Windows from scratch. All right. So my point being is that when you are doing those major jumps between Windows 10, a lot of people don't realize that's a new operating system. It's not like Windows 7, Service Pack 1, Service Pack 2. When you're jumping from 15.11, we'll call it, let's go extreme. If you're jumping from 15.11 and you're putting on 2004 or 2104, right, mate, that's not a minor upgrade. That's a new operating system, Pete. Right?
Yeah, it depends on which versions you're doing, because there was a bit of a TikTok where the first release of the year, the like 1903, for example, is the major one, but then the second release of the year is more like Service Pack.
Yes.
But if you're jumping 3 years worth of stuff, that's
a major operating system. Yeah, but even something from let's say 1903 to 1909, that's the Service Pack. What we call it, the Windows 10 Service Pack, right? So we'll use 1903 to 1909. They're very, very similar, right? Very, very similar. But 1903 to 2004, that's a jump. Right, to me, that's a
because
jump.
You've got a major version in between plus the
correct
Service Pack type thing.
That's what I meant. But we went full medieval on this one, 1511, which I loved. And this, this laptop had not missed a beat in all of those years. It had not missed a beat. He was just forced to go there because of the video editing aspect of it, and it was a bloody mess. Even when he first did the update to get even just getting the video stuff working again was a bloody pain in the ass, let alone the audio. So that's just my 2 cents.
On the plus side, they got a bunch of Thunderbolt fixes, as well as the fix for the being able to load a large number of plugins. But yeah,
of course. But we're only this is like a little 6-core or 4-core laptop, So he wasn't getting impacted with those massive, what was it? Yeah. What was that FLS slot? Was that what it was called?
Yep. Yeah. Fiber local storage slots. Yeah.
Oh, mate, we got a stack of improvements. So the FLS, that was the big tick. He was never dealing with the MMCSS. He was never dealing with that. He's a Cubase user. He was completely oblivious to that. Anything 6 core below, you're completely oblivious.
Yeah.
But it was just it was an eye opener for him from a little workhorse laptop that had run absolutely rock solid for years to turn into this scrambled mess.
And now so now you know why things like the thread director stuff are Windows 11 and not just another number on 10, because your feedback about them being major operating system changes between numbers, and that's not obvious to everybody, was it wasn't just you giving us that. Yeah.
So that thread, okay. So that thread director, that's far more deeply embedded than just a.
That's kernel code.
Okay, but it's not like it can't be addressed by a chipset update. Your chipset driver update. I would have thought it would have been just a chipset driver update, microcode update. All right. I'm still holding out hope, Pete. I know I shouldn't hold my breath.
And I don't know, maybe they will, but I would understand why we wouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's just I hate the idea of having product lines split across Windows 10 and Windows 11, and only,
I agree
because of the necessity. But that's
it'll iron itself out over time here. But right now at this transition point, it doesn't help with all the shortages that the 12th gen stuff from Intel is sort of slow to hit the shelves. It's just sort of a whirlwind of things happening slowly.
Yes. Yeah, so I think the next 3 or 4 months is going to be very interesting. So I'll see how that all pans out. Okay, I think guys, that's we've been going over 2 hours. Okay, so that's a again.
Isn't that what we always do? Right?
Yeah, we do. I think we should put a pin in it at the moment because there's a lot of stuff that's still transitioning and evolving at the moment. I would have thought we would have been far more further along with 12th gen, further along with Apple Silicon.
Everything,
further along with Windows 11. I personally thought I would have been further along with Windows 11. So we've still got stuff to cover. So we're going to leave it till the next one. All right. So I think, guys, thank you very, very much again for your time and energy. Very much appreciated. Chris, thank you again for getting up early because I know you're not a morning person at the best of times. So
I'm all good now.
Yeah, I know you've probably had 3 coffees while you've been chatting away.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, look, and again, my pleasure, and you're more than welcome to come again because I think with these TechBytes shows, I think the 3 of us kind of giving different perspectives is kind of quite good. So if you feel like coming back again, Chris, in 6 months, let's reconvene and see where we are with all of the above again.
No problem.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. All right, then. Thanks again, guys. Okay, and with that, on to the next.